morning everybody. Project 74 model number 3. This is a number 2 set station truck. This is not really one or the other of two different vehicles. Now station trucks, as I remember, battery operated, rather like forklift trucks without the forklift, used to tow what they called buttes, which were like caged trailers for parcels, luggage, that sort of thing, catering stuff. You still see some of that, but they're a lot smaller. Or a scarab, what we call mechanical oss around these parts, or mechanical horse if you prefer. Now this is a bit like a mechanical horse, except there's no trailer, and it's a bit like the little tractor, battery operated tractor units that used to pull these buttes. Anyway, whatever it is rather neat in some respects. It's rather flawed, well, possibly in others, in one certainly, but it is quite nice. It is a number 2 set, so don't expect miracles. You do have steering. Of course, it's a 3-wheeled vehicle, so the steering is very easy, and even with a fixed rear axle, that's no diff and no one wheel spinning on the axle alone, it still does circles very well indeed, and goes round and round and round, as we shall see later. I think the word of the day for this model, if you like, almost the main modification, if you like, is washer or washers. I've used several extra ones. One is very important, or rather one use of them is very important, and that use of washers is in regarding the rear axle and the wheels in relation to the flange plate chassis at the back. Now what I've done, I hope you can see into this, on all 4 bolts, 2 per side, I've had to add a washer there to bring effectively the trunnions a bit lower, further away from the flange plate. This enables the actual tyres on the wheels to clear here. There's another benefit to this, and I've found this quite often with models that use the magic motor, which is this, the clockwork magic motor. This is a 1930s one with a rather rough looking pulley, but it does work quite well. Originally known as the X series motor, but they are handy. They are a bit limited though, because you get things like this. The rubber band here, the drive band, does in this case just rub on the motor side plate, which doesn't aid the movement of the model if it touches too much. I've only just thought of this. What you could do to stop that rubbing, it's only just touching there now, but to stop that rubbing at all is add 2 washers per bolt on the trunnions to lower the axle and move the axle further away from the flange plate. That should clear nicely then. Talking of drive bands, this is probably one from the same sort of period as the model design, not necessarily all the parts of course, probably 1970s, maybe before that. It survived very well. A lot of them don't. I've just found 2 in a fairly good, well, very good remains of a 1960s number 6. I haven't touched them, and I've looked down and both of them have split open and just broke apart. That's rubber for you. Now you might think, well, that's okay, just use the more modern equivalent from about the last, sort of within the last 10 years. The yellow ones, they're a fraction too long, unfortunately, hence why I've used one of these. Now another occasion I've used extra washers, and this will run through the whole project really. This will be a common, I will do it every time sort of mod addition, and that is washers where bosses come up to rub against other parts, in this case these trunnions, as you can see there and there. Now I'm using the more modern Allen head bolts. Why? Because I've got more of them than the slotted ones. I haven't measured them back to back or head to head, but the diameter, the outside diameter of these bolts does seem to be a little bit larger than the original slotted bolts of the period of the design. And what I find is, and this is very small, but I don't think the camera will zoom in and focus much closer, they tend to just protrude past the boss there. So just in this case being a little bit higher, so it won't run flush against a part. So what I've done is you add an extra washer just there between whatever part it is going to be, in this case the trunnions and the boss, and that makes sure that the head does not touch any other parts when it rotates. More use of washers outside the design. Here we've got 2 bolts of 4 that mount the motor to the flange plate. These are standard length bolts but are still too long, so washers have been added to, in this case, to effectively shorten the bolt. Why, you may ask? Quite simply, to mount the motor here, more so this end than that end, to help the spring clear the nut. And it's touching now, very close anyway. If you stop the spring coming out, you shorten the run of the motor, so do everything you can to let that motor run its fullest possible course. Right, we move on to the front now, and the steering, or rather the axle for the front wheel really. There's only one washer per side in the original design here, and you can imagine the flopping around of the front wheel. So more washers have been added. I think it's 4 each side without counting, to stop that. It still moves around a bit, but not that much. Now this little addition of washers is one of the, well, it's a failure really. Inside here, which hopefully you can just see, there's a bolt that goes through the boss of the bush wheel onto the steering column axle, and with one washer as shown in the design, the bolt heads there between that one on the bush wheel and the ones are the supports for the steering column at the top. Fixing all that together will hit. The other benefit of adding those washers is twofold. One, it has quite a slope otherwise from rear to front. Without those washers, effectively they've lifted the front up sort of 1/4 of an inch, I suppose. The other thing with having the slope as it was is that the motor, especially the shaft for the key underneath, can catch the floor. This is the closest I can get in, and the focus works on the camera. Maybe the new camera, when we get round to using that, will be a benefit. Thanks to my, shall we say, one and only supporter. Again, washers. I think this is the last time I mentioned washers, extra washers. Extra washers used, as usual with builds, where there's a slotted hole, where there's a flexible plate to prevent damage. And in the same vein, here we've got the support more or less in the centre of the steering column. Steering column goes to the centre of it, and this 48A, which is a 2.5 by 1/2 inch double angled strip, provides support for the, shall we say, the bonnet, the flexible plate here. The trouble is, it's a little bit narrower than the width of the model at this point. Because we've added these strips to the side of the flange plate, they are pushed out a fraction more. It's also quite thick coating on these strips because they're, well, probably no more than a couple of years old. So behind here, between the double angled strip and the flexible plate, per side we've got another washer to level things out and stop any distortion at this point. And that's it. There's no real major issues to build the model other than described. The main problem is the rear tyres touching the flange plate. The front steering would not be very good without the extra washers, both on the steering column and on the front axle, but it would probably run alright. That is the killer thing, if you like. Again, I'd recommend you adding 2 washers per bolt per trunnion.